booked an Airbnb in a nearby city about 3 years ago. Technically, I didn't have to stay overnight, but I had an important job interview scheduled for the next morning, and I didn't want to deal with a 3-hour drive at sunrise right before it. I left my place around 4 in the afternoon and pulled into the driveway at about 7. The rental was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The houses were all family style, pretty typical for that kind of area. I grabbed my bag and headed inside. The moment I stepped through the door, my chest almost jumped out of my body when a woman came around the corner and started talking to me. I hadn't expected anyone else to be there, so it caught me off guard. She quickly introduced herself and explained that she was using the other half of the house for a few days and just wanted to say hello to avoid any awkwardness. I didn't realize this was a shared setup, but I introduced myself politely before going to my room. As soon as I got inside, I opened the Airbnb app to double-check the listing. I wanted to see if I'd made a mistake or if something strange was going on. Before I could even scroll through the details, the woman showed up at my door again and struck up more conversation. She asked a lot of questions trying to make small talk, and I hinted that I wasn't really in the mood. She either didn't notice or ignored it. If I had to guess, it felt like she was flirting, which was odd, given how little time I'd been there and how late it already was. After a couple of minutes, she left, giving me the chance to actually look at the listing. It clearly said the property was a house for rent, no mention of multiple rooms. The photos only showed a single bedroom, though which didn't clear anything up. I texted the host asking about it, but figured I'd just stick it out for the night. At best, I could sort out a refund later. I carried my bags into the room, then went into the kitchen to cook some food I'd picked up along the drive. Within a minute, the woman appeared again. This time I got a better look at her. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with worn-out eyes and disheveled hair, like she either hadn't slept properly or had just rolled out of bed. She started chatting again, asking questions about me and sharing random details about herself. It became clear pretty quickly that she was definitely hitting on me. I was only in my early 20s, and the whole thing felt uncomfortable. I didn't want to come off as rude since we were under the same roof, but the more she pushed, the more unsettled I felt. She eventually started smiling in a suggestive way and asked if I wanted to see her room. I declined politely, telling her I just wanted to eat and get some rest. She didn't let up right away and kept insisting. The longer I turned her down, the more her smile faded until she was clearly irritated. That was when things shifted from awkward to disturbing. My phone buzzed on the counter, and when I picked it up, my stomach dropped. The message from the host read, "Nobody else should be in the house. If someone is there, call the police immediately." I looked back at the woman who was now frowning, and before I could even react further, a door slammed somewhere down the hallway. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house. Without thinking, I bolted. I left my food in my bag. Everything, I just sprinted for the front door. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a man rushing toward me from the hallway. I made it outside, jumped into my car, and sped away. By the time officers came to check the place, the two of them were gone. Strangely enough, my belongings were still in the room untouched. To this day, I have no idea what they were planning or what would have happened if I'd followed her into that room. My friend Daniel and I were heading to a mutual friend's wedding in Montana. They decided to have the ceremony in the small town where they grew up, which wasn't exactly convenient for anyone else, but it was their choice. Daniel and I booked an Airbnb not too far from the venue and took his car across several states to get there. The town was mostly farmland with a small main area that had a grocery store, a few restaurants, and some local shops. The place we rented turned out to be a farmhouse, which we expected. But what caught us off guard was how much land surrounded it. The property felt almost completely isolated. No neighbors, no traffic, just open fields, clusters of trees, and the dirt road that led us there. We brought our bags inside and got settled. The house itself was decent, nothing fancy, but perfectly fine for a couple of nights. Daniel and I spent the rest of that day just hanging out and talking before turning in around 11. I had some trouble falling asleep at first, probably because of how far out in the country we were. The silence and isolation made me uneasy, but once I finally drifted off, I slept pretty soundly the next morning. We went to the wedding and didn't make it back to the Airbnb until around 9 or 10 that night. Daniel went straight to bed, but I stayed in the living room for a little while to unwind. I had only been sitting there for about 10 minutes when I heard a soft knock at the front door. I froze. Not liking the idea of someone showing up this late, I got up and walked to the door to check. But when I looked out, there was no one there. I opened the door slightly and glanced around. The driveway was empty and the yard was quiet. After a moment, I shut the door again. Daniel's room was dark, so I knew he was already asleep and hadn't heard anything. I figured it must have just been the house making a noise that sounded like a knock. I sat back down, but less than a minute later, I heard another faint knock, this time from the opposite side of the house. My nerves shot up. I rushed to the back, switched on the outdoor light, and peered out the window again. Nothing. The yard was empty, and beyond it was just the dark outline of the woods. I stayed by the window for a few minutes, scanning the tree line, hoping that confirming nothing was out there would calm me down. Instead, it only made me feel worse. Something about being in that isolated farmhouse was unsettling. I stayed up a while longer, but eventually convinced myself to try to sleep. My room was across the hall from Daniel's, and once I got into bed, things were quiet. I slowly drifted off. I woke up suddenly to the sound of knocking, this time on my bedroom door. "Daniel," I called out. To my relief, I heard his voice from the hallway asking me to come out. I stepped into the hall and immediately saw how shaken he looked. His face showed pure fear. I asked what was wrong, and he told me he had woken up to the sound of someone moving around outside his window. When he pulled back the curtain, he saw the figure of a man walking around the property. As we were talking, we both heard clicking noises coming from the front door. We hurried to the living room and saw a man on the porch, pressing himself against the door. From the way he was moving, it was clear he was trying to mess with the lock. I looked at Daniel, and he didn't need me to explain what was happening. He ran straight to his room to call the police, while I stayed at the door, pressing my hand firmly against the lock. Terrified the man might get inside, I could hear him fiddling with something, then growing frustrated. Suddenly, he ran off toward the side of the house. Neither of us had the courage to check the windows. Instead, we locked ourselves in one of the bedrooms and waited. It felt like forever before the police finally showed up. They didn't find much evidence, and the case went nowhere. To this day, I don't know who that man was or why he tried to break into the farmhouse. But if those knocking sounds earlier in the night had been from him, that means he had been circling the property for hours, fully aware that people were inside. That thought alone makes the whole situation far more disturbing. I don't usually travel much, so this was one of the rare times I needed to stay somewhere that wasn't a relative's or a friend's place. The town I was visiting was small, and most of the hotels there looked run down. To my surprise, I found a house listed on a rental site. It was my first time using the platform, but the pictures made it look far better than the hotel options. I put in my dates, and within minutes the place was confirmed. The following week I made the drive. It took about 14 hours from my city, and by the time I arrived, it was late at night. The town looked lifeless compared to what I was used to. Houses were dark, businesses were shut, and I didn't see a single car or person around. Of course, it was the middle of the night, so I didn't expect much activity. But the emptiness still felt unsettling. The street that led to the rental was just as dark, winding through a quiet wooded neighborhood, until I pulled up at the house. It was one of the few with the porch and exterior lights. I also noticed a glow from a second-floor window, but I assumed the last guest had simply left it on by mistake. I didn't think much of it and carried my bags to the door. Using the code from my confirmation email, I let myself in and quickly locked the door behind me. I dropped my things in the corner, then went upstairs to turn off the light that had been left on. It turned out to be a spare bedroom with nothing but a bed and a small dresser. I switched it off and went to the main bedroom to settle in. I had only booked one night, but I added a second since I needed to stay late into the next day. I stayed up for about an hour scrolling through my phone as a small distraction before finally lying down. Sleep didn't come easy, though I found myself tossing and turning still awake, when I suddenly heard a thud move through the walls of the house. I sat up staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. When I couldn't, I decided to check. I don't usually travel much, so this was one of the rare times I needed to stay somewhere that wasn't a relative's or a friend's place. The town I was visiting was small, and most of the hotels there looked run down. To my surprise, I found a house listed on a rental site. It was my first time using the platform, but the pictures made it look far better than the hotel options. I put in my dates, and within minutes the place was confirmed. The following week, I made the drive. It took about 14 hours from my city, and by the time I arrived, it was late at night. The town looked lifeless compared to what I was used to. Houses where dark, businesses were shut, and I didn't see a single car or person around. Of course, it was the middle of the night, so I didn't expect much activity. But the emptiness still felt unsettling. The street that led to the rental was just as dark, winding through a quiet wooded neighborhood until I pulled up at the house. It was one of the few with the porch and exterior lights on. I also noticed a glow from a second-floor window, but I assumed the last guest had simply left it on by mistake. I didn't think much of it and carried my bags to the door. Using the code from my confirmation email, I let myself in and quickly locked the door behind me. I dropped my things in the corner, then went upstairs to turn off the light that had been left on. It turned out to be a spare bedroom with nothing but a bed and a small dresser. I switched it off and went to the main bedroom to settle in. I had only booked one night, but I added a second since I needed to stay late into the next day. I stayed up for about an hour scrolling through my phone as a small distraction before finally lying down. Sleep didn't come easy, though I found myself tossing and turning still awake, when I suddenly heard a thud move through the walls of the house. I sat up staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. When I couldn't, I decided to check. One of the officers asked if I knew anyone in town, if I'd had any disagreements with anyone on my way here. I explained I was a complete stranger, that I had driven straight to the house and spoken to no one. They seemed puzzled. The rental owner was contacted and spoke to me over the phone, sounding genuinely shocked and deeply apologetic. He confirmed that the access code was electronically generated and unique to my booking, and that it had been changed automatically after the previous guest checked out. He had no explanation for how someone could have been inside the house. He immediately refunded me for both nights and told me not to worry about anything, that he would handle the report from his end. The police took my statement, advised me to keep the doors and windows locked, and left after assuring me they would patrol. the area for the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with a lamp on, watching the bedroom door, every creak of the house making me flinch. The sun rising felt like a rescue. In the daylight, the house seemed normal again, but the memory of the night was burned into my mind. I packed my things in a rush, not even bothering to make coffee. I just wanted to be gone. I took one last look at the splintered doorframe before I left a stark physical reminder of the terror. The drive away from that town felt infinitely lighter than the drive in. What unsettles me most is how determined that man was to get inside my room. His anger felt directed at me personally, like I had wronged him somehow. The whole experience was terrifying, and it stuck with me ever since. I doubt I'll be using rentals like that again anytime soon.